All right, looks like we've got a pretty hefty stack of articles and reports here, all about green architecture. Someone's been doing their homework.
Yeah, it seems like they're really interested in digging deep into, well, how to make buildings more eco-friendly. Where do you want to start?
Well, first things first, right? Maybe we should make sure we're all on the same page about what green architecture actually means. It's more than just slapping some solar panels on a roof, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. Way more. It's really a whole philosophy of building, a way of thinking about minimizing the impact a building has on the environment, and not just when it's standing there, but throughout, like its whole life cycle.
So it's not just about the building itself then. It's about how it's made, how it runs, even what happens to it at the very end, huh?
Exactly. It's like if a regular building's like a gas-guzzling SUV, a green building is like, I don't know, a sleek electric car that runs on solar power and was built with recycled materials or something.
That's a pretty vivid image.
Yeah.
But why should the average person care about making buildings greener? Is it really that big of a deal?
Oh, it's a huge deal. I mean, think about it. The construction industry has a massive footprint. Globally, buildings gobble up something like 40% of all the energy we use, and they're responsible for a third of all greenhouse gas emissions. Those numbers are pretty staggering.
Whoa, yeah, that puts it into perspective. So we're talking about like climate change, more extreme weather, all that stuff.
Exactly. And it's not just the planet that benefits. Green buildings can actually be healthier and just, more comfortable for the people inside them.
One of the articles mentioned passive solar design. That sounds intriguing. What's that all about?
It's actually really clever. Passive solar design is all about orienting and designing buildings to take advantage of the sun's energy, both for heat and light.
So, like, instead of relying so heavily on artificial lighting and heating systems that just guzzle energy, you're designing the building to work with the natural environment.
Exactly. Imagine a house with big self-facing windows to soak up the sun's warmth in the winter. And then, in the summer, overhangs above the windows would shade them from the higher sun, preventing overheating. That's passive solar in action.
That's smart. It sounds like green architecture is all about being resourceful and efficient. I was reading this one source, eco-friendly architecture, building a sustainable future. And they talked about using different building materials that are more in tune with the environment. Can you give us some examples? What are people using these days?
Oh, there are some really amazing materials out there. One that's super cool is aerogel insulation. It's incredibly light, but so effective at preventing heat loss. It's like wrapping your house in a super efficient blanket.
And what about this self-healing concrete I keep seeing pop up? Is that for real? Sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But it's a real thing. This special concrete actually repairs tiny cracks on its own, using bacteria that produce limestone.
No way. That's wild.
Huh.
So not only does it last longer, but you don't have to keep fixing it all the time. That saves a lot of hassle and resources.
Exactly. And then there's cross-laminated timber, which is becoming a popular alternative to steel and concrete for building structures.
Ah, right, wood.
Yeah.
I remember reading about that. So what's the advantage of using wood? It seems like we've always been told that concrete and steel are like the strongest and most durable materials.
Well, wood, when sustainably sourced, is actually a much more eco-friendly option. See, unlike steel and concrete production, which spews tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, growing trees actually absorbs carbon dioxide.
So you're using a renewable resource, A&D, avoiding those nasty emissions from the traditional building materials. It's a win-win. What kind of impact does that have on a building's carbon footprint,
Oh, it's significant. One study found that using cross-laminated timber instead of concrete and steel could slash a building's CO2 emissions by a whopping 40%. That's huge.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the materials themselves, is it? There's also a whole tech side to green architecture that's super fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. Technology is playing a bigger and bigger role in making buildings smarter and way more efficient.
One of the sources I was looking at, green architecture, a solution for creating a sustainable future, talked about something called real-time rendering. What is that exactly? And how does it fit into green architecture?
So real-time rendering is basically a super powerful tool that lets architects create these virtual models of their designs. They can see how their building will perform under different conditions, kind of like a video game for architects.
That sounds pretty cool. But how does that help with sustainability?
Well, for example, they can use it to simulate how sunlight will hit the building at different times of the day and throughout the year.
So they can see if there are any spots that might end up being too dark or too hot.
Exactly. And then they can tweak the design, maybe add more windows for natural light, or adjust the roof to create more shade in the summer. It's all about using technology to make the most of natural resources and reduce the need for things like artificial lighting and air conditioning.
It's like you're giving the building a test run before you even break ground. That's really smart. What other tech tools are architects using?
Another really useful one is building performance analysis software. It's like a virtual crystal ball that can predict a building's environmental impact. You can see how much energy and water it'll use, even how much waste it'll generate.
Wow, so you can pinpoint potential problems before they even become problems.
Yep, and that means you can adjust the design to make it more efficient. Maybe add more insulation, use more energy-efficient appliances, that kind of thing. It's all about minimizing that environmental footprint.
It's amazing how technology is making green architecture more, accessible and definitely more effective. But beyond all the tech stuff, are there actual buildings out there that are showcasing these green principles, like real-world examples? I'd love to hear about some of those.
Oh, absolutely. There are some incredible buildings around the world that are really pushing the boundaries of green architecture. For example, have you heard of the Bullitt Center in Seattle?
Yeah, I think so. It's been called, like, the greenest commercial building in the world or something like that, right?
Yeah, it's definitely earned that title. It's a 6-story office building that's designed to be completely self-sufficient. It generates all of its own energy with solar panels, collects and filters rainwater, and even has composting toilets.
Wait, composting toilets. Now that's innovative. How does that even work?
It's pretty fascinating, actually. Instead of flushing waste away with water, they use a composting process to break it down into, well, compost. And then that compost can be used to fertilize the building's rooftop garden. It's like a closed-loop system where waste becomes a resource.
That's incredible. It's like this building is more than just eco-friendly. It's actually beneficial for the environment. Are there any other examples that come to mind?
Oh, tons. There's the Q building in Berlin, which is a pioneer in smart and sustainable design. It uses AI to optimize the indoor climate based on who's in the building at any given time.
It's like it knows what temperature you like and adjusts accordingly.
Pretty much. And then there's Earthship Biotecture in New Mexico. They build these incredible homes out of recycled materials like old tires and bottles. Talk about resourceful.
Wow, that's amazing. It sounds like people are getting really creative with sustainable building. But there's one thing I'm still a bit fuzzy on. I keep seeing all these terms, LEED, BREEAM, EDGE. What are those exactly? Do they have something to do with green architecture?
Yep. Those are all green building certifications. Think of them like badges of honor that a building can earn for meeting certain environmental standards.
So it's a way to prove that a building is truly green, not just, greenwashing.
Exactly. Each certification has its own criteria and rating systems, but they all focus on things like energy efficiency, water conservation, sustainable materials, and how healthy the indoor environment is.
So if I see a building with, say, a LEED Platinum certification, I can be pretty confident that it's a legit green building.
Absolutely. Those certifications provide a standardized way to measure and verify a building's sustainability, which is great for everyone involved.
That makes sense. It sounds like green architecture isn't just some futuristic concept anymore. It's happening right now all over the world. But I imagine it's not all smooth sailing, right? There must be some challenges to making it more mainstream.
You're right. There are definitely some hurdles to overcome.
Well, let's dig into those after a quick... You know what? Scratch that. Let's just keep rolling. I'm curious to hear what's holding back this green building revolution.
I'm happy to unpack those obstacles and maybe brainstorm some potential solutions. Well, one of the biggest roadblocks is the perception that green buildings are just, way more expensive to build.
Yeah, that makes sense. People are always hesitant to shell out more money up front, even if it means saving money down the road.
Exactly. And that's where I think we need to do a better job of shifting the focus from short-term costs to long-term value. Sure, green buildings might have higher initial construction costs, but because they use less energy and water, their operating costs are usually much lower.
So it's kind of like buying an energy-efficient appliance. You might pay a bit more at the store, but end up saving money on your utility bills over time.
Exactly. It's the same idea. And not only that, green buildings often have higher property values and tend to attract tenants who are willing to pay a premium for, a sustainable space. So the return on investment can actually be pretty significant.
Right, so it's really about educating people about the long-term financial benefits.
Yeah.
It's not just a feel-good thing. It actually makes financial sense.
Absolutely. But yeah, it's not just about the money. I think we also need to do a better job of highlighting the environmental and social benefits of green architecture. It's about creating healthier spaces for people and, treading lightly on the planet.
One of the sources, green architecture. Green building concepts to ensure a green future. Talked about how important green spaces are in cities. How does that tie into green architecture?
Well, green architecture isn't just about individual buildings. It's also about how buildings interact with their surroundings, how they fit into the bigger picture. Integrating green spaces into urban planning can make cities healthier and more sustainable overall.
Can you give me some examples of what that might look like?
Sure. Imagine a city with green roofs, vertical gardens, parks strategically placed to help regulate temperature, reduce air pollution, even manage stormwater runoff. Those green spaces act like the city's lungs, basically, cleaning the air and providing a much-needed dose of nature.
That's a beautiful image. It's amazing how something as simple as plants can have such a huge impact. But even with all these benefits, I'm sure there's still some technical challenges to figure out, right? Green buildings can't be all sunshine and roses.
You're right, there are definitely some technical hurdles. One that keeps coming up is the reliance on renewable energy sources, like solar and wind power, which can be a little finicky.
Ah, right. So what happens if it's cloudy or there's no wind? The building's just out of luck.
Well, not necessarily. That's why it's important to have backup systems like battery storage or a connection to the grid just in case. You need to ensure a reliable energy supply no matter what Mother Nature throws your way.
Makes sense. What other technical challenges are there?
Another big one is maintaining a comfortable indoor climate while, still minimizing energy use. Green buildings often rely on natural ventilation and passive heating and cooling strategies, which can be trickier to manage than traditional HVAC systems.
So you really have to be smart about how you design the building and how you work with the natural environment.
Exactly. It's a more delicate dance. You have to consider things like the building's location, its orientation, the surrounding environment. But it's definitely possible to create spaces that are both comfortable and energy efficient. It just takes some careful planning and, a bit of ingenuity.
This one article, Green Buildings P&NL, also mentioned how tough it can be to navigate all the different green building standards and certifications. It seems like it could get pretty overwhelming for developers and builders.
Oh, it definitely can. But remember, those standards are there for a reason. They ensure that green buildings are actually walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And as the industry gets more, mature, we're seeing more streamlined processes and tools that are making it easier for everyone to embrace sustainable building practices.
That's good to hear. So even with these challenges, it seems like the future of green architecture is pretty bright. This other source, The Future of Green Building, was talking about some really cool advancements on the horizon. What are you most excited about?
One area that has huge potential is AI. Imagine integrating artificial intelligence into building management systems. It could optimize energy consumption, predict when maintenance is needed, even personalize the indoor environment for each occupant.
So it's like having a super smart building manager who's constantly working behind the scenes to make everything run smoothly.
Exactly. AI could totally revolutionize how we design, build, and operate buildings. And then there's the push towards net zero and even carbon positive buildings.
Oh yeah, I remember reading about those. Can you remind me what those terms mean?
Sure. Net zero energy buildings are designed to produce as much energy as they consume over the course of a year. So basically, they cancel out their own carbon footprint.
So they're not adding any extra carbon to the atmosphere. That's amazing.
Right. And carbon positive buildings take it even further. They actually remove more carbon from the atmosphere than they emit. It's like they're actually healing the planet.
Wow, how do they even do that?
There are different approaches, but one way is to use building materials that sequester carbon, like wood or bio-based materials. These materials actually absorb carbon dioxide as they grow, and then they store that carbon within the building structure.
So the building itself becomes a carbon sink. That's pretty mind-blowing.
I know, right? It's a really cool concept that could totally transform buildings from being part of the climate problem to being part of the solution.
The Future of Green Building also talked about how the real estate market is starting to demand more sustainable buildings. It seems like people are finally waking up to the benefits of green living.
Yeah, totally. Buyers and tenants are looking for places that are healthy, comfortable, and good for the planet. And as that demand grows, it'll push developers and builders to make sustainability a priority.
So it creates a kind of snowball effect. More demand leads to more green buildings, which leads to even more awareness and demand.
Exactly. It's a win-win for everyone. And it's not just individuals who are driving this change. Governments are getting in on the action too.
Oh, really? How so?
They're starting to implement policies and regulations that encourage or even mandate sustainable building practices. We're seeing more and more green building codes popping up around the world.
So we're talking about a global shift towards more sustainable building. That's really encouraging.
It is. It's all about creating a system where sustainability is baked into the very foundation of our built environment.
That makes sense. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the people who are actually designing and building these structures, right? The construction industry itself has a huge responsibility to push this change forward.
You're absolutely right. Architects, builders, developers, they all need to embrace these new ideas and technologies. And it's not just about the technical stuff, it's also about working together, collaborating, and sharing a commitment to building a better future.
One of the sources really emphasized the importance of collaboration between everyone involved in the building process. Why is that so crucial?
Well, building a truly sustainable structure isn't a one-person show. It requires a holistic approach, looking at the whole life cycle of the building, from the initial design to the materials used, the construction process, even how the building will be used and eventually demolished.
So you need everyone on the same page. Architects, engineers, contractors, even the people who will be using the building.
Exactly. It's like an orchestra. Each musician needs to play their part in harmony to create beautiful music. If one instrument's out of tune, it throws off the whole thing.
Love that analogy. Okay, we've talked a lot about the big picture, but let's bring it down to earth for a second. What does all this mean for our listener who might be thinking, this is all great, but what can I do?
That's a great question. Even if you're not an architect or a builder, you can still make a difference. It starts with making sustainable choices in your own life.
Like what kind of choices?
Think about simple things. Using energy-efficient appliances, cutting back on water usage, adding more plants to your home. Those small changes, when multiplied by millions of people, can have a real impact.
And it's not about being perfect, right? It's about taking steps in the right direction.
Exactly. Every little bit helps. And don't forget the power of your voice. Support businesses that are doing things right. Advocate for greener policies in your community. Talk to your friends and family about sustainability. Spread the word.
Love it. Let's make green architecture the norm, not the exception. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, from all the cool tech to the challenges we face and even what we can do as individuals. But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear about some specific examples of how this is all playing out in the real world. It's one thing to talk about the theory, but seeing it in action is a whole other level of inspiring.
Absolutely. Let's take a look at some real-world success stories that are transforming the built environment.
So, where should we start our world tour of green buildings? What project really jumps out at you as like the epitome of what's possible?
Well, we already talked about the Bullitt Center in Seattle, but I think it's worth another look. It's a real trailblazer when it comes to net zero energy design.
Yeah, that's the one that generates all its own energy, right?
Right.
It has those composting toilets.
That's the one. And it's not just energy. The Bullitt Center also collects rainwater for all its non-drinking water needs, like flushing toilets, watering plants, things like that.
So they're not putting a strain on the city's water supply either. It's amazing how much they've packed into that one building.
It really shows how a building can function more like, I don't know, a living thing, working in sync with nature, not against it.
Okay, so that's a stellar example of a green commercial building. What about homes? Are there any residential projects that stand out?
Oh, tons. There's Earthship Biotexture, which we touched on earlier. They're building these super unique off-grid homes out of recycled materials like tires and bottles.
Right, they're out in the New Mexico desert, if I remember correctly. Is there a reason they chose that location?
Yeah, the desert climate is actually perfect for Earthship homes. See, they rely heavily on passive solar design. The houses are partially buried to take advantage of the Earth's natural insulation, and they have these big south-facing windows to soak up the sun's heat during the winter.
It sounds like they're really in tune with the environment.
Exactly. Plus, they have systems for collecting rainwater and recycling gray water. They're really minimizing their reliance on outside resources.
It's amazing how they've thought of everything. So we have a high-tech office building in Seattle and eco-homes in the desert. What about other parts of the world? Any cool examples from across the pond, maybe?
Definitely. Let's head over to Manchester, UK. There's a building there called One Angel Square, and it's pretty spectacular. It's the headquarters for the cooperative group, and it has the highest possible BREEAM rating for sustainability.
BREEAM, that's another one of those green building certifications, right?
Yep. It's one of the leading sustainability assessment systems in Europe. One Angel Square got that top rating because of all its amazing eco-features. It's got a double-skin facade to regulate temperature and a natural ventilation system that uses the wind to keep the air fresh.
It sounds like they've managed to make it super eco-friendly without compromising on style. I've seen pictures, and it's a beautiful building.
It really is. And they didn't stop there. They even put a garden on the roof. It helps with insulation and also reduces the urban heat island effect.
Oh, right. Cities tend to be hotter than the surrounding areas because of all the concrete and asphalt, which absorbs heat. So a rooftop garden can actually help cool things down.
Exactly. It's like giving the city a little bit of breathing room.
That's so cool. So they're thinking about the building's impact on its surroundings, not just the building itself.
Right. One Angel Square is a great example of how to apply green building principles to a large-scale commercial project. It proves that sustainability can be done no matter how big the project is. Speaking of large scale, have you heard of the Shanghai Central Tower in China?
I think so. Doesn't it have some kind of special facade that helps with temperature control?
Yeah, it's got this double-layer facade that acts as a thermal buffer, keeps the building cool in the summer and warm in the winter. And like One Angel Square, it also collects rainwater and has these amazing vertical gardens that clean the air and make the building feel more, alive.
It sounds like a breath of fresh air in the middle of a concrete jungle. It's so inspiring to see these architects pushing the boundaries of design to create buildings that are beautiful.
Yeah.
Maybe good for the planet.
I agree. And it's not just happening in big cities and developed countries either. The Oasis School in Kyrgyzstan is a great example of how these principles can be applied in a totally different context.
What's special about the Oasis School?
Well, it's designed to be completely self-sufficient when it comes to energy and water. They have solar panels, wind turbines, and they use passive design to make the most of natural light and ventilation. But what's really cool is that they used local sustainable materials to build it.
So they're reducing the environmental impact, A&D, supporting the local community.
Exactly. The Oasis School is proof that you can create sustainable and resilient buildings anywhere in the world, no matter the challenges.
Wow, I'm getting super pumped about the future of green architecture after hearing all these amazing examples.
Me too. It's clear that the movement is growing stronger every day. And as technology keeps advancing and costs come down, I think we're going to see a real explosion in green building in the coming years.
Can't wait. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listener to walk away with? What's the most important message?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we all have a part to play in building a more sustainable future. It doesn't matter if you're an architect, a builder, or just someone who cares about the planet. You can make choices that support green building and a greener way of life.
Right. It's about being mindful of the buildings we live and work in, supporting businesses that are doing things right, and speaking up for policies that encourage sustainability. We all have a voice.
Exactly. Every little bit counts. And remember, we're not just doing this for ourselves, we're doing it for future generations, for the planet.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of green architecture. We hope it's inspired you to think differently about the buildings around you and the future we're building together.
It's been a pleasure. And to our listener, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep pushing for a greener world.